Welcome to Radio Carbon 14. This is our first broadcast, one of many to follow. My name is Bjarne Waldemar Troften, and our first endeavor will be the narration of a book written by the late Hungarian author and mystic Maria Szepes, The Red Lion. It has become a bit of an occult classic. The intention here is to show a pathway of self-realization. Not the pathway, but one of many which individuals will inevitably find when it is their soul's time to make all of the experiences here in time and space coalesce into a singular understanding for the final voyage home. The swansong incarnation, the last life, leaving the wheel of rebirth and graduating from planet Earth. We will find that this is not a story of human glory, but one of reality that is hard won, where the individual understands upon graduation to whatever deity may be goes the glory. This book we would like to break into 4 sections. The first section represents the protagonist's ambition. The second section represents his hubris and arrogance. The third section represents the understanding that comes to one that is crushed like a grape, that the wine of the Spirit might emerge. And the fourth section is the realization, the very realization that you, who are listening right now, is looking for. It is everything you want. It is everything your soul needs. And all this story is to your human personality is a vision that might be but to your soul it is a keyhole that once she sees through it to the light of home, she will compel and propel you to embrace her lover, the great mystery of God. So, I do not seek to convince you of anything, but I will let you know that if you take the time to follow the train of thought that will be released through these readings, your soul will catch fire and demand that you arrive at the final destination, home. Prelude. Adam Kadmon's letter reached me in the summer of 1940. At that time, I was living in a small house, the existence of which no one except a few intimates was aware. It was a low peasant house with wild vines shading the veranda and Kelly green shutters that set off the whitewashed walls. The house was on a gentle, sloping hillside, hidden under a tent of sweet-smelling linden trees. There was no access by either car or train. The road to the nearest railway station wound through the hills for a good hour. Even the mail reached the place only once a week. I had named my hideaway Noah's Ark. The inside of the house had been made into a comfortable dwelling, but I still had to pump water into the reservoir with a hand pump and depend on oil lamps and candles at night. But then in 1940, everyone of a sensitive nature longed to go back to the quote-unquote primitive past, away from the berserk blessings of so-called culture. From my veranda, I could look down on vineyards sprawling over the hills whose feet brushed the waters of the Danube. I had intentionally chosen this inaccessible home after much searching for a suitable one, for I felt if I did not get away from the pestering city atmosphere, I would never finish my research. Yet my occupation tied me to the city. I was head of a large mental hospital, and it seemed impossible to get away from my numerous obligations. Perhaps a doctor is more a slave to his profession than any other man. In my territory, nothing can be set aside. Each and every event has a terrifying unexpectedness and will not brook delay. The field I was pioneering presented a grave dilemma. Both my profession and my book required my full attention. I had been collecting data for the book for years, but I still had a great deal of reading to do to clarify a number of details. At first, I tried to use a portion of the night for this purpose, but my health suffered and my work suffered with it. The areas I was working in demanded a concentrated effort to keep my thesis from being weakened and open to attack. I could not use mediocre arguments to set forth an extremely important idea. So, after many delays and compromises, I finally asked for 4 months' leave of absence and threw myself into the matter like someone jumping off a precipice. My disturbed conscience was suppressed by the overwhelming clamor of an inner urge. After all, I had put my best assistant in charge of the hospital before I walked out of that world. At first, I could not accept the magic peace of solitude and work. During the first week, my unfinished cases swarmed around me like disquieting caricatures, but I firmly quashed them. If people were indispensable, surely death would not exchange them continually like governments taking printed money out of circulation. Making known the method I had discovered and successfully tested was far more important in the long run than the treating of a few isolated cases. My role in this book is not an important one. I merely dwell on the nature of my work because it makes Adam Kadmon's appearance more understandable and has a part in his compelling story. I had been treating mental disorders for 25 years. Approximately 10 years before, I had turned to an entirely different theory from the cul-de-sacs of the prevailing authorities. But I had not made my experiments public. I well respect the caution of science and her sometimes exaggerated defenses against pioneers, so I was prepared for my own work to be drowned in ridicule, viciously attacked, or simply passed over in silence. These considerations did not bother me. Some of my students were of such talent that they could not be banned from the field. They had already been, quote-unquote, contaminated by my theory and were using it in their practices. We were getting remarkable results, and more important, our patients became human beings again. I called my system meta-psychoanalysis. By my definition, the psyche is the immortal intelligence which in this world is most highly developed in the consciousness of man. The peak of man's awareness unfortunately compares to the limitless spirit, as does a speck of dust, to the cosmos. A disease of the soul means there is some kind of damage to the bridge, the organs that transmit between the individual and the spirit. He who would doctor the soul must diagnose and correct this malfunction with all the efficiency and thoroughness of clinical research. If he only treats the symptoms, he may well fill mental institutions and the world with raging living dead. Of course, I am not speaking of organic diseases of the brain, which can have such a baleful influence on a man's entire life. I am talking about diseases of the soul which seem to be invisible and defy analysis. Now is the time for a general revolution of the spirit, and with it the art of healing. I believe in Hermes Trismegistus, who revealed the law of analogies in an ancient tradition whose roots go back to the prehistoric past. His truths have constantly reappeared, but people with small, wicked minds have failed to recognize them. There is the example of Paracelsus, whose envious colleagues crushed the skull for which they would have given thousands of their own. But as for Adam Kadmon's letter, which precipitated all these reflections, it contained only a few lines. Very honorable Professor, I hope the results of my forthcoming visit will justify the interruption of your work. I will only be with you for 2 days. I do not yet know exactly when I will arrive, for I have other matters to settle first. But I believe I will be able to start this week. Until we see each other, heartfelt greetings from your friend, Adam Kadmon. Yes, he actually signed it Adam Kadmon. The letter had been mailed from Budapest. At first, I thought some of my friends were playing a practical joke. Only 3 people knew my current address: my assistant, my housekeeper in Budapest, and the bachelor colleague with whom I played endless chess games. This last was in the hospital recovering from gallstone surgery, and nevertheless I did not believe that any of them would give out my address. But how had this Adam Kadmon gotten it? And why did he call himself by the Kabbalistic name that means cosmos? And what did he want with me? Every morning my first thought was, will he come today? The 3rd day I strolled out to the railroad station pretending I only wanted to go to the village for some matches, candles, and food. When I got back, he was there. He was sitting on the veranda when I came up. He stood and offered me his hand, and I studied him curiously. It was impossible to determine his age. He was not old, but he was not young either, despite the lack of wrinkles on the narrow, fine-drawn face. For some reason, the concept of age did not seem to fit him at all. He seemed to be timeless, a part of the eternal present. Though his features were slightly Mongolian, his complexion was that of a Southern European, and I could hardly look away from those brilliant, almond-shaped eyes. His head, with its noble forehead and concave temples, would have been a delight to the phrenologist. He wore an ordinary, white, summer suit, and his straight black hair came to the nape of his neck. However, I cannot describe the essence of his being, that penetrating glance that seemed to pierce through forgotten memories. The man was not a stranger to me, but I did not know the origin or nature of our bond. He inquired about my work, displaying his soft, even voice. We became absorbed in conversation, and I was somehow not surprised to find him well informed. Even when he mentioned details of my as yet unwritten book, I thought he must have read them in some of my magazine articles. Then, I remembered I had never mentioned these things in print. I stopped and stared, and he smiled. It isn't witchcraft. I am just a step ahead in the territory you're exploring. That is all. The whole book is in your thoughts, and I have read it. Every man has this latent ability. It only needs to be developed. This statement expanded my world by a few dimensions. Then we started talking about the war. He had come from Lublin, he said, to visit me, and he would return there day after tomorrow. I was quite surprised at this. Why had he been in Lublin, where the war was then at its worst? Was he Polish? But he spoke perfect Hungarian with only the slightest accent. And he had spent only one day in Budapest before coming to see me. Who mailed the letter in Budapest 4 days before? How did he know about me? And how could a private individual travel through the war zone? I am not Polish, he responded to my unspoken question. I moved to Lublin in July of '39. You're a German? I said with choking suspicion. Are you? I came from Tibet, he replied simply. I decided to visit you before I ever left. If you will clear your soul of the distractions of your ephemeral consciousness, you will realize that you were waiting for me. Naturally, the man destined to such a revelation awaits it with his emotions and subconscious feelings as well as his intellect. You feel that an inexpressible essence not susceptible to the laws of science will reveal itself. The only difference between us is that you guess what I remember. But that is not important. What is important is that you know the facts, do the work you were meant to do, and preserve your personal entity. But what is this work I was meant to do? And what is all this about my personal entity? The questions were torn from me. The biggest problem with using words, he replied, is that they mean something a little different to everybody. When I said, I remember what you only guess, I mean, I remember previous lives. You believe in reincarnation yourself. You have had experiences and you have feelings about it. For instance, I know you feel this is not the first time we have met. And you followed an inner command when you came to this Noah's Ark to finish your work. The future needs that work. And I know that this inner command of yours is really a mission from that place where spiritual revolutionaries are preparing the new age with the help of conspirators who have renewed souls. You are one of them. Kadmon continued, though you don't remember it in this life. I assure you that at a time in the past, you consciously pledged yourself. The thing is clear now, isn't it? I nodded involuntarily, though this explanation dazzled rather than enlightened me. Throughout Adam Kadmon's visit, I was filled with a strange, elated feeling. In his presence, I could not bring myself to dispute or analyze any of his statements. Sometimes I thought I must be a victim of the power of suggestion. His every word, even when it was directly contradictory to all logic, hit me with a force that exterminated every germ of doubt. Yet, I had experienced enough of that type of suggestion to know that this was something different. Adam Kadmon was not trying to influence me. I could feel no aggression emanating from him. He was just being himself, in possession of tremendous illuminative power and controlled spiritual forces and abilities. His utterances had an air of certainty. That evening, we lounged in the garden after supper, sitting under a star-studded sky. The constellations shone all around us, and the Milky Way flowed through the heavens like a pale, mysterious river. Near the full moon shone two clear, brilliant stars, Saturn and Jupiter in close conjunction. I began to watch the two planets and to think about their powers that both oppose and complement each other. Jupiter is the great benefactor, a fiery and constructive being. Saturn is the obstacle, the source of the chilling suffering which yet teaches. Jupiter is the friend of the sun, Saturn a celestial loner. The danger from the one is fire, from the other is freezing. How does the struggle between these two giants affect the world? The constellation of the Messiahs, Adam Kadmon said softly. His voice seemed to be the distillation of the incomparable night around about me. Again he answered my unspoken thought. The birth of Christ was also preceded by this conjunction. At that time, it was in the sign of Taurus, and it brought us Christianity. Now it will bring a philosophical and social revolution, a redemption of the spirit from its prison of matter. The Messiah being born now will open the gate of the new epoch. The Messiah being born now? Where? When? I could not comprehend him. In Lublin, in April of 1941. In the ghetto of Lublin, to be exact, where there is the greatest suffering and darkness. The signs of his coming are here already. The man of sin, the great lawbreaker, has appeared in the power of his deceit. And the Messiah will follow his signs, contrasting reality with illusions. He will come as a liberator from the Antichrist. To fulfill the scripture and make the eternal rhythm of the surf of time audible, he will come as the illegitimate child of a Jewish girl, a girl burdened with the sorrow of her people, their frightening cleverness in their sufferings, and the terrified tenderness they show one another in their persecutions. She is the counterpart of that other mother who gave birth to her son in a stable 1940 years ago. His voice was soft and his story was simple, but they kindled a fire within me. I was certain, with an unbounded, unreasoning certainty, that what he said was true and was more real than the visible world around me. "And you? Why did you go to Lublin?" This was the first question I had dared to ask about him. When wisdom is to be born in the stable of human hate, those who are invited to the baptism will reach him by following the star. I have already been invited. That is why I came back from namelessness to prepare for him and announce him. I am here to make the true ones aware that these are the times of which the prophecies spoke. The days are coming when the fast-grinding mills will crush every human support. Fires will burn the last refuge of matter. There will not be a single foothold on earth or shelter for fleeing humanity. The golden calf will tumble off its pedestal forever. Floods of tears will not soften the merciless demons who are coming. Oceans of blood will flood nations, cities, houses, and fields. Blood always washes the world clean before it is covered by the cool ocean of Aquarius. These dispassionate, apocalyptic words did not penetrate my mind immediately. I looked at the dark, soft landscape that murmured all around. I could hear the crickets and smell acacia and elder. Dogs were barking somewhere on a distant farm. From the river I could hear the soft, hoarse voices of the frogs begging for rain. The whole idea of blood and death seemed far away from this clean, peaceful night. Then suddenly I felt a premonition of the horrors of the coming years. I was overwhelmed at the thought of unsurpassed destruction, the mouthings of rabid hatred and their corresponding oppression of defenseless masses. The whole was an uninterrupted suicidal St. Vitus's dance. Suddenly, the landscape about me was filled with ominous life, a murmuring of fearful voices, pulsating in a heart-rending anticipation of horror. The feeling was so real that my heart began thumping violently. "No!" I cried. "Human beings cannot descend that low. No one could endure such a time." "The human soul is both divine and demonic," Kadmon replied. "Which side predominates depends on which of the two forces reaches the control levers first. The elemental influences that pour into the soul attack it irresistibly at every weak point. That is the way hate works, and anyone who has the slightest inclination toward it must fight against it with all his might, or else he will be drafted into the demonic army of hate and be lost. Hate is the most frightening and magical force that has ever appeared on the earth. It can conquer every other human weakness, selfishness, hedonism, and even the fear of death. It whips a man's fanaticism into a white-hot glow and melts him into its own mass. It will even risk its own destruction to destroy. But why must these things happen? My shout echoed among the sleeping trees. If there is a planner with a plan for visible things, how can he give way to the forces of destruction? Precisely because there is a plan behind visible things, was Kadmon's sober answer. This is to be the time of a great transmutation of the earth. Her entire essence is to be altered. She will cast out the contaminated and refine the remaining few into precious metal. The coming cataclysm is by way of a provocative injection. It will bring the latent disease to the surface in those who are tainted with it. But the people are weak and ignorant, and they act without responsibility, I pleaded. It is their leaders who are educated and unscrupulous. It is they who misuse the black magic or propaganda, not the ordinary man. The transgression is theirs. It is their poisonous editorials and broadcasted word bombs that beleaguer the bewildered skulls of the people. How can they defend themselves? They don't have any independent ideas or lines of moral defense, only their wants. They are just children flocking to their doom after the Pied Piper of Hamelin. Why should they be punished? You are quite right. Most people are children. Children who play very cruel games, harming themselves and all other living creatures. The earth can no longer be their playground, Kadmon replied. It is to become the home of reasoning adults. We were silent for a time. I could not argue with the man. His words were similar to the visions of Enoch, Baruch, Ezra, and John. You had to accept them or reject them. Presently I spoke again. Why did you come to me, a single individual, all the way from Tibet through Lublin to Noah's Ark? As I spoke, I suddenly saw the grave implications of my whimsical name, Noah's Ark. Kadmon's next words reinforced my feeling. I have brought something that must survive this new flood of blood. I had to come now to bring it, otherwise it would have been too late. A mad joy raced through me. I thought he referred to the whole of Hungary. I am only talking about this little house, he answered my thought. Noah's Ark, and even it will be shaken when the tempest begins to blow. So you think this nation will not be spared from... No, it will not escape. Oh, well, I'll help you in any way I can. I know, he replied simply. I came to bring a manuscript I want you to keep until I can send you instructions on what to do with it. It would not be safe with me where I am going to be for the next few years. You can read it if you would like. The next afternoon, he left. That is how I came to have Adam Kadmon's manuscript. I am now executing his written instructions to make it public for those who have survived the bloody flood and are trying to find their way back to life. I never saw Adam Kadmon again. from its fear and pain, and help the people to feel free again. Why don't we listen to the voices in our heart? 'Cause then I know we're fine, we're not that far apart. Everybody's got to be happy, everyone should sing. 'Cause we know the joy of life, the peace that love can bring. Thus spoke the wizard in his mountain home. Vision of his wisdom means we'll never be alone. And I will dream on my magic night